August 27, 1964, where it all started. Before we get to the co-ed murders that made him famous, we need to talk about where it all began, because this is where you see the warning signs that everyone ignored. Edmund Kemper was 15 years old and already deeply disturbed. He spent his childhood torturing and killing cats, burying them alive, and decapitating his sister's dolls. His mother, Clarnell, was verbally abusive and made him sleep in the basement because she thought he would harm his sisters. His father abandoned the family. Nobody wanted to deal with him, so they shipped him off to live with his grandparents on their remote California ranch. On August 27, 1964, Kemper grabbed a .22 caliber rifle. His grandmother Maud was sitting at the kitchen table reading. He aimed at the back of her head and fired. She died instantly. When his grandfather came home, Kemper shot him multiple times in the driveway. Then he did something that shows just how calculated he was even at 15. He called his mother, calmly told her what he'd done, then called the police and waited. Psychiatrists diagnosed him as a paranoid schizophrenic and sent him to a hospital for the criminally insane. But he was 15, so he wouldn't face adult charges. 5 years later, he'd be free. He used the time in hospital to study psychology, memorize the right answers, and convince every doctor he was cured. By 1969, they released him. By 1972, his record was sealed. The system had just given a double murderer a fresh start. 1969-1972, the genius plays the long game. Kemper moved back in with his mother in Santa Cruz. The same woman he hated more than anyone in the world. She was working at UC Santa Cruz, constantly belittling him and treating him like a failure. But Kemper was patient. He got a job with the California Highway Department, which gave him perfect knowledge of every isolated road and canyon in the area. Then he did something brilliant and disturbing. He started hanging out at a cop bar called the Jury Room. He befriended police officers, learned how investigations worked, and became known as the friendly giant who gave safe rides to hitchhiking students. While he was planning murders, cops were buying him drinks and sharing case details. He was studying them just like he studied the psychiatrists. And all the while he was driving around UC Santa Cruz in his Ford Galaxy, watching young women, offering harmless rides, building trust in the community. He was practicing, testing himself, installing special locks on his car doors that only opened from the driver's side, buying handcuffs, knives, and plastic bags. Everything was ready. He just needed the right moment. May 7th, 1972. The first co-eds. Marianne Pesci and Anita Lucchesa were both 18 years old, hitchhiking near Cabrillo College on a beautiful spring day. Kemper pulled over and offered them a ride. They climbed in without hesitation. Why wouldn't they? He looked harmless, but the moment they were inside, he drove them to a remote mountain road. When they realized something was wrong, it was already too late. The doors wouldn't open. Kemper pulled out a gun, forced them into the back seat, and taped their mouths. He stabbed Marianne repeatedly while she fought back. Then he strangled Anita with his bare hands. Then he drove both bodies back to his mother's apartment while she was at work. He had hours. He photographed the bodies, dismembered them in the bathtub, and kept their heads as trophies. He later committed unspeakable acts with the severed remains. Then he scattered the body parts across different locations in the Santa Cruz Mountains. When hikers found the remains weeks later, police had almost no evidence and 0 suspects. September 14th, 1972. Aiko Ku. 4 months later, the urge came back. 15-year-old Aiko Ku was hitchhiking home from dance class when Kemper pulled over. She got in. He drove to a remote area, pulled out a gun, and suffocated her with his bare hands while she was still in the passenger seat. He said later he felt a rush of power watching her die. Same pattern. Drive the body home, photograph it, dismember it, scatter the remains. By now he had perfected his method. And police still had no idea who was doing this. January-February 1973, the killing accelerates. By early 1973, Kemper was killing constantly. On January 8th, he picked up 18-year-old Cindy Shaw. He shot her in the head, brought her body home, and spent the entire night with it. He buried her severed head in his mother's backyard, facing up toward her bedroom window. He said he did this because his mother always wanted people to look up to her. Less than a month later, on February 5th, he struck twice in one night. Rosalind Thorpe and Alice Liu were roommates hitchhiking together. Kemper offered them a ride. He drove to a remote area, shot Rosalind in the head, then chased down and unalived Alice when she tried to run. He brought both bodies home, decapitated them, and kept the heads. When investigators found the remains weeks later, they knew they had a serial killer, but they had no leads. And here's the insane part. During this entire time, Kemper was still hanging out at the jury room with cops who were investigating these very murders. They had no idea the friendly giant buying rounds was the killer they were hunting. April 20th to 21st, 1973, the real target. Kemper later said all 6 co-ed murders were just practice. The real target had always been his mother. On the early morning of April 21st, he crept into her bedroom with a claw hammer and beat her to death while she slept. But killing her wasn't enough. He decapitated her, placed her head on the mantel, and used it as a dartboard. He screamed at it. Then he cut out her larynx and tried to put it down the garbage disposal. It jammed and spit it back out. He said even in death his mother was still giving him hell. Later that day, his mother's best friend, Sally Hallett, came over for dinner. Kemper let her in and strangled her from behind. He hid both bodies in a closet, spent the next day dismembering them, then got in his car and drove 1,500 miles to Colorado. And then he waited. He expected to hear news reports about his mother's murder. Nothing. Nobody had even noticed she was missing. So on April 23rd, 1973, Kemper did something almost no serial killer has ever done. He called the police and turned himself in. When Kemper called the Santa Cruz police from a payphone in Pueblo, Colorado, the officers thought it was a prank. But then he started giving details only the killer would know. Locations of bodies, methods of killing, names of victims. The officers realized it was real. Kemper told them where he was and waited. He didn't resist arrest. He didn't fight extradition. He wanted to be caught. At trial, he tried to plead insanity, but the jury saw through it. He had planned every murder carefully. He had chosen victims deliberately. He had fooled police for years. On November 8th, 1973, Edmund Kemper was convicted of 8 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He actually requested the death penalty, but California had suspended capital punishment, so instead he got life. Kemper has been in prison for over 50 years now. He's been eligible for parole multiple times, but refuses to pursue it. He says he belongs in prison and would likely kill again if released. He's participated in hundreds of hours of interviews and helped the FBI develop psychological profiles for serial killers. He's polite, articulate, and disturbingly self-aware. Edmund Kemper remains one of the most terrifying examples of how intelligence and charm can hide absolute evil. He didn't just kill 8 people. He studied the system, manipulated everyone around him, and perfected his craft, while drinking beers with the cops trying to catch him. That's what makes his case so chilling. His case became so significant in understanding criminal psychology that he was prominently featured in the Netflix series Mindhunter, where his interviews with FBI agents helped shape the early development of criminal profiling techniques that are still used today.